When I left home when I was 14 and a half, I had about a 10-mile walk in the snow, that's not a joke, to the next town to catch a Greyhound bus. And it was a life lesson for me because I had an old military green olive drab duffel bag. And I packed everything I thought was important inside that duffel bag. And I hefted it, and I was young, I was strong, I was determined, and I started walking. And I tell you, I was about ready to litter the roadside along the way by the time I got halfway through that trip and it started snowing again. But I stuck to it. But at the end, I had to wonder about the choices I had made putting each of those items into the duffel bag. Some were practical, a spare pair of jeans, a clean shirt. Others were like things, books, a little figurine, and I had to wonder years later about that. What was the criteria that caused me to put things in that duffel bag to the point where 10 miles later I could barely carry that duffel bag, especially in the snow. Of course, once I got to the bus station and the bus driver chucked it underneath the belly, my carrying concerns were over, so, but for that 10 miles, I struggled. And it is a struggle for people to decide what to put in their life, what to divest themselves of. So if you're a reseller and you're called in for an opportunity to clear out somebody's garage or their workshop or a whole house, a storage unit, but try to be forthright, try to be direct. So why do humans live in shelter? Well, there aren't enough caves. No, having said that, we do it for a number of reasons. We shelter from a storm. The elements can be hard on a body, especially an old one like mine. But we do it to control the climate, to protect ourselves, our goods. We don't want those marauding hoarders, to get our stuff. The zombie apocalypse. You got to keep yourself and your family safe from the zombies. But the downside of shelters, of buildings, houses, especially here in America, they tend to be filled with things, clutter. Now, if you're a reseller, there's an opportunity in there. If you're just your average homeowner, it can become burdensome. It can actually start to dictate and control your life. We did a job, it comes to mind, this would have been about 10 years back, and it was for a widow. She lived over in the city towards Tacoma, and we were contacted through a mutual friend because she decided it was time to clear out her husband's oversized, it was about a 3-car garage, and the widow hadn't been in it since he passed. And I got the impression when we talked to her that she hadn't been in it for many years before he passed. It was like his man cave, his space. And she finally decided it would be in her best interest as she got older to be able to park her car there in the winter inside. So she hired us. She invited us over to scope the job out and talk to her. And she basically hired us to empty it wall to wall. Among the other things we found in there was a big old wooden boat. Didn't have much value, but it took up a lot of physical space. But we asked her if, once we got it organized and made some aisles, because it was full, if she wanted to come in and look through the stuff to save or keep anything that was personally of interest to her. No, she wanted nothing to do with anything he had kept. I don't know, it struck me as odd, but maybe it was just her way to box off and put, memories in a cubbyhole. But she wanted nothing to do with anything inside that building. When it was clean, broom swept, and empty, she came out and started thinking about where to park her car. But it was basically the end of closing off one part of her life and moving forward with another. And that particular job always stayed with me. Because then she was turning her attention to an extra room in the house. And we started talking about, he was like a ham radio guy. So there was a whole bunch of old tubes and electronics. But she wasn't ready to commit to that room yet. So she was doing it in segments. She was eating that elephant one bite at a time. And sometimes that's the way you have to do it, because the things, they say that if you own things, things can own you. So if you're a reseller and you're called in for an opportunity to clear out somebody's garage or their workshop or a whole house, a storage unit, and if you're still dealing with the person, because I used to do that. I used to post ads back in the days when, before Craigslist. I used to post ads that said, if you're about to default on your storage unit rent, call us instead. We may be able to help out. And I used to get jobs that way. I'd leave my business cards at the desks of all the local storage facilities. This was long before storage wars. And I would get calls from people, especially the heirs. One couple, I remember, they flew in because it was their uncle's stuff. And he had multiple storage units, and it was just big, heavy, old stuff. And they certainly couldn't put it on a plane and take it back with them. So they needed to fly in, deal with it, pay off his bill at the office, and leave town. Okay, so that's where I came in. But when you're dealing with the people, either the original owner or the people left behind when the original owner passes or moves into assisted living, you have to have a little bit of, I don't want to say empathy, because you're in a business, but try to be forthright, try to be direct. If the money involved is the stumbling block, you may have some flexibility. But don't undervalue the time it's going to take to do the work. Be frank, be honest. It surprises some people when you start talking about how many trailer loads and the cost of disposing of trash and hazmat and the time involved in sorting out the excess. Because we all seem to go through life accumulating excess. And if you don't want to leave it to your heirs, try to deal with them, as much of it as you can along the way. Rose and I have this conversation regularly, now that we're getting older, about what our legacy is going to be. What do we want to leave to our children and grandchildren? Cash is good. Some things are good. But a lot of things are just things. Rose has a friend who fancies herself a minimalist. And when Rose spends the day with her and comes home, she looks around and she starts seeing all the excess eBay inventory, and it begins to bother her. I tease her and say, well, it's a Tuesday, so on a Tuesday you want to clear out all the surplus and you want to live a simpler life. But on a Thursday or a Friday, we're going to go do an auction pickup. So it swings. Some days you feel almost oppressed by the things in your life. Other days you see an opportunity. And of course, the last couple of years we've really been experiencing the ebbs and flows of that because of our move and our downsizing. So we're actually having to find places for those things we wish to keep for ourselves, find storage space for the inventory for the small business that we run, reselling primarily on eBay. But sometimes it does overflow. You do a big auction haul, or you go pick up a load of packing supplies. You've got to find places to put it all and keep it organized. Because if you're not organized, you feel a little bit lost and overwhelmed. It's easy to do. Sometimes when I open up the bins that came down from my workshop in Seabeck, I go, why did I pack that item up on the Seabeck end and send it here when it's unlikely I'm ever going to use it? I'm coming up on 70 years old, Am I really going to use a chainsaws again, or am I going to use post hole diggers? Am I going to, linemen's spikes to climb poles? So, yeah, things. Some days it's like, well, let the zombies have them. Send them in, we'll give them the stuff. But there's something about the whole retail therapy concept. You look around, you're surrounded by stuff, it depresses you a little bit, you want to ignore it, so you go online and you buy something, and you add to the clutter. Well, in there are many opportunities. And for most of the last 30 years, Rose and I have occupied much of our time dealing with other people's obsessive buying. At their end of their lives, when they move into assisted living or they pass away and their estate has to be dealt with, Rose and I have come in and helped to clear up those messes, that clutter, that excess. Or we've gone in and bought delinquent storage units where people put everything they didn't need immediately in storage, and then for one reason or another never came back for it or couldn't pay for it. Maybe they passed away, maybe they just decided they didn't need it at all. And I'm reminded of that every time I go into one of my buildings or I go to pull out an item. Today I'll be packing up 7 or 8 items, and they include a couple pieces of vintage electronics. Electronics is one of those categories that it turns over quickly. People, if they've got a phone or a laptop and it's just a couple years old, they think of it as out of date. Other things you keep around, like your bell bottoms from the 70s, because you're pretty sure it's going to come back into style and you're going to be ready, even though you're 4 sizes bigger than you were in the 70s. Other things are worth saving. Family mementos, vintage books, antique books that meant something to you when you were young. But give it some thought. How many things do you actually have around your house that have real intrinsic meaning beyond their functionality? For instance, a coffee maker, very functional. A coffee grinder to grind up fresh beans, very functional. But how many do you need? You look in some kitchens and there'll be the set of Pyrex they got from their grandmother, and there'll be the set of the blue stuff, the Corelle from their mother, and then there'll be the things made by their children in art pottery class, and then there'll be the items they selected for themselves. So you can easily end up with generations of redundant things because at some point you had an emotional attachment to them. And emotions are definitely very strong if you're buying up estates and the heirs are around. I always preferred to do the work for a lawyer or a real estate agent or somebody who lived out of state. Because if you've got somebody left, a surviving spouse, maybe a grown child, they want to tell you about everything in the house. Now don't discount that, but you've got to pick and choose the information you're willing to stand there and receive. Otherwise you can spend an awful lot of time not moving the stuff, not prepping for a sale, and just listening. But if you pick up something and it's got value and a bit of a story will help you list it and sell it, stop and ask and say, how old do you think this is? Where did this come from? Right? And you may find a provenance. They may be able to actually give you some information or an old photograph. If you find Wilt Chamberlain's book and it has a signature and they can show you a photo of them with Wilt Chamberlain and the book, you've got something there because you don't have to go out and have a third party try to authenticate a signature. But in general, try to avoid those long conversations about absolutely everything in the house. because it will really lengthen the job. All right, I'm still out here waiting for some folks who are supposed to be on their way to pick up something. But I guess I've about exhausted this topic for now, and I think my peeps are here.